Tonight, we're going to get started in just a moment here. And our chair and vice chair are running a few minutes late, so since I'm hosting tonight, I'm just going to make myself acting chair for a few minutes, unless there's an objection. All right, so thank you all. Let's begin with the roll call.
Okay. Supervisor Haggerty. Supervisor Miley. There's no representative from Alameda County. Vice Mayor Nick Pilch.
Here.
Mayor Jesse Adewin. Councilmember Sophie Hahn. There's no representative from Berkeley. Vice Mayor Don Biddle.
Here.
Councilmember Diane Martinez.
Here.
Councilmember Vinnie Bacon.
Here.
Councilmember Al Mendel.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Spadovsky. There's no representative from Livermore. Councilmember Dan Kalb. Councilmember Abel Guillen. There's no representative from Oakland. Councilmember Tim Rude.
Present.
Vice Mayor Lee Thomas.
Present.
Councilmember Lauren Ellis. Councilmember Gary Singh. There's no representative from Union City. Includes the roll.
And we have our...
Item number 7. You're going to item 5 when she'll be introduced as Anna Olivia Eldred.
We have our vice chair.
Oh, wonderful. So while our vice chair is getting situated, next up we have our public comments. So if there's anyone who wants to address us on any item that's not on the agenda, now would be the time. Not seeing anyone step forward. So Director Kalb, are you ready with the consent calendar?
First I got to do this. There we go. Okay.
Pardon me, Vice Chair. Please note that there are amended minutes on your dais. The correction was to add that Councilmember Pilch was absent and excused from that meeting.
Okay. And I'm sorry, we just finished public comment? Yes. General public comment? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Consent agenda, which looks like it's just our minutes. Do I have a...
I move approval.
Approval?
Second.
There's a contract as well on the consent.
Yeah.
Should be approval of contract extension with Richards, Watson, and Gershon for EBCE General Counsel Services.
Both 3 and 4. Oh, that's the last.
Am I looking at something?
Yeah, that's the last.
My apologies. Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Vice Chair?
Yeah.
May I request that we do, over here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. May I request that we approve the minutes and the contract separately, because I would like to abstain from the minutes as I was absent.
I have no objection to that. Let's have a motion on the minutes.
So moved.
A motion and a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor say aye on the minutes.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? We have 2 abstentions there on the minutes, and that passes. I'm sorry, do we have a quorum, right?
Yes.
Thank you, appreciate it. Got it. Okay, and now we have, thank you, contract extension. This is consent agenda. Any comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion. Entertain a motion and a second.
Second.
Motion and second. No public comment on the consent agenda. Do we get any cards for public comment on consent? No. Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions?
No.
That passes unanimously of all those present. Thank you. Regular agenda. We're welcoming, yes. We're going to welcome the chair of our advisory committee. And Madam Clerk, is this the only speaker for any of our items so far? Okay.
No.
And Al has a lot of things to say today? Great. Which is good. Okay, we'd like to introduce Anna Olivia Eldred, who is chair of the Community Advisory Committee and therefore a member of this board. Welcome, and we'd like to say a few words. Tell us a little bit about you.
All right, my name is Anna Olivia. I work with the California Nurses Association and National Nurses United. I am a delegate to the Alameda Labor Council and the Contra Costa Labor Council, and a member of the Environmental Justice and Climate Caucus. I have been involved in this process for a couple years, and am thrilled to have one of the most competent and dedicated community advisory committees that I have ever worked with, ever. And we are excited to be proactively giving you recommendations about this most important thing that is happening in our community. So we're glad to be here.
Thank you. Welcome. Thrilled to have you. And how many meetings has the Community Advisory Committee, how many times have they met so far? Twice.
We have met twice since your last meeting.
Great. All right. And will there be a published schedule of the meetings of that committee so the public can know when that is meeting?
We've received, yes, there will be, and we've received a request from our new CEO to work with our new staff on creating a timeline for receiving information and being able to give feedback so it can be taken into consideration by this board.
Great. Thank you very much. Welcome aboard. Any comments or questions on this informational welcome item? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the next item. County update on a variety of matters. Staff has a presentation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Just a few words tonight. It's going to be fairly brief. Just wanted to give you a quick rundown of what the Community Advisory Committee is doing. The CAC actually held 2 meetings in July, both on the 6th and 18th, which was yesterday. A number of specific operational actions took place, including election of chair and vice chair, overview of conflict code, Form 700s and Brown Act, and they also made a determination of the 2-year initial seats as required by the JPA agreement. So the 9 members on that committee, 3 of those seats are 2-year seats. The rest are 4-year seats in order to stagger them. As soon as those 2-year seats are reappointed in 2019, they will then all be 4-year seats from that point onward. So the new chair, Olivia Eldred, has already been introduced to you. I'd also like to introduce the vice chair, Mr. Nick Gelati. He's here tonight. Nick, you want to stand up or raise your hands? Sure. Say everybody. There he is.
Welcome.
So Ann Olivia and Nick are going to be working probably closely on the CAC on all the issues they are concerned with. On both meeting dates, you should know that the CAC did examine in detail the policy implications of the implementation plan with an eye toward both IP recommendations and future more detailed policy concepts as the EBC approaches launch date and beyond. The CAC chair is planning to discuss some of these ideas for now item 7, and that'll be coming up in just a few minutes. So there's a note here that at the July 9th meeting, this 19th meeting, the CAC was expected to consider some motions that could result in some future formal requests to the board. Because of the heft of the meeting last night, they didn't get to those, so they will get to those at the earliest possible convenience in the future. Okay, next matter is the data management and call center, the bid evaluation update. So as I think you know, EBCE received 2 bids for the data management and call center services RFP offering, both from experienced and knowledgeable firms. The interviews will be held tomorrow, July 20th, beginning at 8:30 a.m. at the county CDA offices. The interview panel will consist of a member of the EBCE board, our new CEO, and the vice chair of the CAC. And staff will be available to assist with procedural matters when we're needed. And we hope to have recommendations and a contract to your board by the August 2nd meeting. And finally, as you know, Mr. Nick Chassett has been hired as the new CEO. He'll formally start on August 3rd. Before his formal start date, he's already guiding and assisting staff to prepare some of the more detailed technical and mathematical matters that the board will need to consider in the near future, and staff appreciates this a great deal. At the August 2nd meeting, staff will also have some pro forma but necessary decisions for your board, including risk management, health insurance, and an update on human resources efforts to bring on additional senior EBCE staff. And that concludes staff updates.
Thank you very much. I don't think we have any public speakers on these updates. Any comments or questions among board members? Okay. Seeing none, thank you for the update, and thank you, staff, for continuing to move us forward while we're still building the formal staff of this agency. Item 7, please.
Okay, I'm going to give just a little introduction then here, and then I'll turn it over to our consultant team. So this is regarding the EBCE implementation plan. This is going to be the third session that we've had on briefing your board for policy issues. And what we hope to get out of this tonight, if everything goes well, is either a consensus or, if necessary, a voice vote that the board is in agreement with the direction the implementation plan should take, so that EES can go ahead and prepare that draft plan for your review and possible approval on August 2nd. The feedback and direction we're looking for include on the core content items, including initial 3-year operating budget, a load forecast, phasing strategy, some initial resource portfolio options, and customer energy programs. And we hope that you will then, again, as before, direct EES and RS2 to prepare a draft power procurement and risk management strategy and some financial metrics for the CEO to consider at the next meeting. Drafts will help inform the board on key policies to guide future financial decision-making and power contract negotiations. Much of this is already information that you have seen, especially the background. Before I turn it over to Gary Saliba and his crew, I just want to say that there were a couple of late additions to the packet. One came in yesterday, and another one came in today. The first one is from the Sierra Club. It's a letter dated July 18th that provides some feedback on the implementation plan and some of their comments and opinions regarding hopefully what the board will include in their direction to EES to develop that plan. The other is a fairly substantial document from the Community Advisory Committee that they have developed over the last 2 meetings, and it includes a lot of ideas about direction that they would like to see your board take. After the presentation by Mr. Saliba and his team, I think that the new chair of the CAC will probably want to present much of this to the board for your consideration. And with that, I think we can go ahead and have EES start their program if they wish.
Welcome.
Thank you, Bruce. Good evening. Good to see you again. I'm Gary Saliba with the EES. Today with me I've got Ryan Ramos, who is our co-leader for the project, and Colin Cameron is here. And most of you people in business understand there are people that talk about business and people that actually do it. Well, you can tell in our firm how we split up those responsibilities. Colin is the one that did the spreadsheet work for most of this. He's the one that's actually done the numbers, and he's the go-to guy for facts. So between me and him, I think we'll hopefully cover all your questions. As Bruce said, we saw you last time about the implementation plan. And to put it into context, the implementation plan has become the critical path for us. To get things rolling, to get it launched, we need to have 3 things. We need to have a data management firm hired, which it sounds like you're close to having done. There's some PG&E administrative paperwork you have to get done, which is just administrative. And you have to have the PUC certify your implementation plan. And you have to have all that done before PG&E will engage you in earnest to start with the billing process and transition, which is a big deal and time-consuming. So we're down to where if you want to launch next year in the first quarter, we need to get the implementation going. And we told you that I tried to give you the disclaimers last time. The implementation plan is not what I'd call a binding document. It's more of a perfunctory document. It's required by statute. The PUC staff has put out an outline on what they want to see. You don't necessarily have to make decisions on the various key parts, but what you do need to do is just say, we know it's there, we're going to address it, and here's how we're going to address it. Well, like one of them is financing. They want to know how you're going to finance operations. Well, you don't know. You haven't got your banker lined up. You haven't got your FA lined up. So we just say that you got your start loan from the county and that you're going to issue an RFP probably for a financial advisor and get a bank involved, and you'll go through the typical process everybody else does, and that's fine for the implementation plan. We don't have to decide who it's going to be tonight. It's just that you acknowledge the fact there's a process you have to go through, and you're going to do that. So And I don't have the button today, so I'm going to have to rely on Bruce to do the button. As far as the agenda goes for tonight, we went through many of the things that are needed in the implementation plan last time we were here, and it came down to where it was hard to make decisions without some numbers. You needed to know a little bit more about the money side of the business before you could make informed decisions about some of these other issues. So over the last month, we've gone back and put together a 3-year operating budget for you. And that's going to be part of the presentation tonight. And we've got a couple of scenarios to look at. One of them is a phase-in, which is fairly conservative. Just kind of starts slow, make sure everything goes right, and then build up. Another one is what I'll call an expedited implementation phase plan. And so we got version A and version B of the budget, and hopefully that'll give you an idea of how much cash you have. The other thing, your consultant, a good consultant, will give you the disclaimers about how accurate this information is, because we do it in Excel, and Excel takes it up to 10 significant figures, so everything looks like it's right down to the penny. Well, this is what I'd call a rough cut of the budget. It's the load, there's the load forecast, the revenues are our best guess at this point. We don't know much about staffing because Nick hasn't got that one. He's not on board yet to get it done, but we don't have staffing costs. We haven't been out for an RFP on power supply, and power supply is 90% of the budget. So we've got our best estimates in for all this, but I wouldn't say it's suitable for framing at this point. We need to get some direction back from you folks about some of these options and how to narrow it down to which way you want to go. And we need to get a little better information primarily on power supply, because that is the big factor in your budget. And which we're going to do, we're happy to do, but we're just not there yet. So we're going to give you some indicative results tonight about where you think cash flow is going to be for the first 3 years, but it's subject to refinement. So that's Saliba's disclaimer up front. Perfect. So back on, how'd you do that, Bruce? We could use him at our office. We have the dangest time with IT stuff in the office. He must have the magical touch. Thank you. So this is an overview of the implementation plan. There's half a dozen things they want you to address in the implementation plan, and I'll go through them quickly. And then, Mr. Vice Chair, I thought, depending on how you wanted to proceed on this, we could sort of run down through what we think on this, and then we could give you the staff position, and then we can go back in one by one and kind of check them off and see what you want to do, if that sequence works. Okay. So the first one is the governance. They wanted the implementation plan. You got to talk about who you are, what the JPA is like, how you're set up. That's all pretty perfunctory. Governance, how's the JPA operate? Your finance and admin. We talked about that a little bit. A staffing plan. They just want to know. Are you going to staff up? Are you going to use all consultants? You're going to wait till the CEO gets on board to decide? Just basically a narrative about where staffing's headed. On rate design, we talked about it last time. Do you want the CCA rate to be a mirror of the PG&E rate with a discount, or do you want to go off on something different? I think on that one, we had some fairly good agreement. On phase-in schedule, I'm going to show you a couple of them tonight with respect to what kind of a conservative phase-in and an aggressive phase-in looks like, and what the money difference is, to give you some parameters around that. Resource portfolio options, those are what kind of power supply options do you want to offer your CCA customers? Do you want to go with just the minimum RPS renewables? Do you want to go 50% renewables? Do you want to go 100% renewables? What we've done in the presentation tonight is to have a base case, which is the RPS equal to what PG&E is, plus 10% more greenhouse gas free than what PG&E has. And then the other option would be 100% green and renewable. And those are the two we've got, but it would not be unusual for you to say, let's do something in the middle of those two, do a third one maybe. That's the kind of feedback we'd like to get tonight. And then programs. What kind of programs do you want to have? Net metering, demand response, low income assistance. There's a whole myriad of those. So those are the things we'd like to talk with you about. But before we get there, I thought we'd like to spend some time going through the budget to give you a feel for what the cash flow looks like under a couple different scenarios. So the first part of well, as I mentioned, we've got a base case and we have what I'll call an expedited case. So I'm going to go through the base case first. That'd be the conservative case, if you will, and then we'll talk about the expedited case and how much difference it makes in money. But on the base case load forecast, we took a look at the way we do load forecasts is take a look at average use per customer times the number of customers we think, and the product tells you what the sales are going to be. So in this case, we assume average use is going to be flat, which we think historically is sustainable. We'll do a better job on that when we give you the next round of budgets. For purposes of this budget, that's what we've done. And load growth is 0.2% a year, which is what the CEC is saying load growth is going to be for this area. So that's the basic input there. We said that participation was going to be 90%. That's in the positive. In the negative, we're saying that your opt-out rate will be about 10% overall. And within that, we're assuming that 95% of the residentials go with the program and 85% of the non-residentials go with the program. On the phasing, again, this is the phasing we talked about last time. Phase 1, which would launch in May 1 of 2018, would be the municipal accounts only. That'd be the county and the city accounts, your city halls, your fire departments, the jail, and those type of municipal and county accounts, plus any volunteers. It seemed like there was sentiment last time that if somebody just wants to get in, they called them hand raisers, let them in. But that's your call. But this assumes that the phase 1 is going to be muni accounts plus some volunteers, we'll call them.
I'm sorry, volunteers meaning any residential, non-residential, or any volunteer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's up to you. But what we're talking about is just anybody that just wants to do it right now, just let them in. Phase 2 would start 4 months later, and that would be all your non-residential accounts plus your volunteers. And non-residentials, obviously your commercial and industrials. And then January 1 of 2019 be everybody else, which would be your residentials. So that's what we've assumed on the phase-in. And we've got another phase-in schedule to show you as well, but this is what we've got for the base case. The base case we thought was fairly, the merits for the base case is it's pretty simple and clear. There's no question, I think it's no question about who's residential and who's non-residential and who's muni. The lines are pretty well drawn for that. I think that'd be an easy outreach, an easy communication thing. You got the municipal accounts, you got the commercial, industrial, and you got residential. And I think that's good. I think I mentioned last time what we want to avoid in phase 1 are people that opt out, the people that are not very tolerant of possibly a bad bill, and somebody that pays the bill. And so it seemed to us like getting muni accounts would be a way of ensuring a lot of that happen. And because you pay your bills on time, I don't think we'd have much worry about bad debt expense with all municipal accounts. You wouldn't opt out because you're the ones making the decision, hopefully. And that's an assumption on our part. I think it would actually. I think that'd be really bad. And the first round of bills you get, it's going to be confusing, and there's probably going to be some problems, just to be candid with you. Your data management people have done a lot of this. They're good at it. They know what they're doing. They've done it with PG&E before. There's some history there. You got all that going on. But you've got this mass of data coming in to PG&E, which they're going to try to get over here to the CCA, and the CCA's got to do some feedback, and you're talking about just huge data files. And there's a chance that there's going to be some of those bills that aren't great. And we kind of like to give the CCA a few months startup to get everybody used to the routine and make sure the money's getting transferred right and all that while people are understanding of the problems up front. And I think the muni accounts would be all that. On cash flow, this would be, I think it's good. Your commercial and industrial customers are your biggest margin customers. They're the most profitable to sell, and we're going to hook them up in the summertime when rates are higher. So we think from a cash flow standpoint, getting the big guys in early is the way to go. And you can have a little flexibility on notice, on timing, and there's a requirement that says before you bring a customer on, you have to give them an opt-out notice option 60 days and 30 days ahead of time, and then 30 days and 60 days after launch. You got to give them all a chance to opt out. And if you have like residential and commercials in phase 1, you're going to have to know pretty much with certainty what your rates are to put in your opt-out notice. So you can advertise your rates are 5% or 2% less than PG&E. That means if you look at a May 1 launch, working back, we're going to have to get your power supply going immediately. And if there's any hiccups in that, we're not going to know what your final rates are in time to do your opt-out notices. If you just do the muni accounts, my sense is you could be roughly right on notifications because you're sending them to yourself. So I don't think that's as critical as if you bring in some other customers in phase one. So that's my pitch on why we like this phase-in system, but there's more to that.
Mr. Chair, if I could just interject quickly.
Yeah.
Our CEO, Mr. Nick Chassett, has a perspective I'd like to share on this if he could.
Well, come on up.
And that's the red, the greens. Having not officially taken my role, I didn't want to sit up there and again. But I just wanted to sort of, one of the points when there was some back and forth on this, on phase-in schedule was the idea that to really know also sort of how long these things are going to take, you need your data management provider on board. Interviews are tomorrow. So the selection process is ongoing, but very likely this contract won't have been executed by the time the implementation plan will need to be submitted. So I think part of this, and this is sort of a theme across the implementation plan, is to say, let's give ourselves options. Let's not sort of stick to one sort of hard set of dates. So, I think one of the directions that we talked about was, whether it's one specific implementation plan or sort of two options, to include a caveat in the implementation plan that says, based on, the integration experience with PG&E and, other real-world factors related to power supply and what have you, some of these dates may be subject to change. Again, think about this is all in the context of what goes into the implementation plan, not actually the final decisions over sort of when the phase-ins are going to happen. I think that's an important context to focus on for today. These aren't the final decisions. The final decisions will come once you have a team of people working on power supply, once you have your data management provider on board, starting the process with PG&E. With every CCA, the process has been slightly different as the utilities have come up the learning curve. So it may very well be that you're able to sort of move your phases from a 4 to 6 month to 2 to 4 months. But there are other factors that may come into play that create challenges that sort of draw that out even further that are currently unforeseen. So again, I think just really important to focus on the fact that we want to give ourselves options in the implementation plan, make sure that it's compliant, but really leave the hard decisions for the board to the time when we actually have more hard numbers and we have more sort of clear sense of what the integration is going to look like.
Thank you.
Well put. And you probably realize that to do a budget, we've got to assume something on this. And this is our straw man to get it out in front of you so we can get some numbers up. But Nick's absolutely right. There's a myriad of things here you won't know for a few months, and you're going to have to wait for better surety before you can make good policy decisions. So anyway, back on the assumptions, the other one was, and this was to Nick's point, we've assumed 4 months in between phases. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 are 4 months, each 4 months apart. It may be if things go well at PG&E, we could do that, we can condense that. There's a probability of that, but we don't, like Nick says, we don't know till we get into it to see how the interaction is going to go. Uh-oh, there we go. I was worried somebody didn't pay their power bill and PG&E cut us off because he knew what we were talking about tonight. So as far as how the numbers for that phase-in works, again, you got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You've got May 18, September 18, January 2019, and the munis, all residentials in the munis and all the accounts. And you start out with about 4,800 accounts. You go up to about 50,000, and then you go up to about 540,000. So the transition from phase 1 to phase 2, I think from a billing standpoint, shouldn't be too bad. You're picking up 50,000 customers. The one going from 2 to 3, to Nick's point again, we're going to have to see how PG&E deals with that. PG&E has told us they can handle 60,000 new accounts each month. Now, they haven't been asked to do that yet. Their biggest chunk's been in the maybe 200,000 or 300,000. So they haven't bit this off yet, but they say they can do it, but time will tell. That's one of those things. In a perfect world, they'd be able to take that whole slug. Excuse me. The other thing is your timing is fairly coincident with City of San Jose. as far as getting the CCA going. They're on just about the same timeline as you are. So it could very easily be that both of you want to go live about the same time, which wouldn't be 500,000 customers, but more like 1 million coming in at about the same time. So we're just going to have to play that one loose and see how it goes. That's just a heads up. There's your load forecast. Everybody wants to see a load forecast with pretty colored bar charts, and there's your bar chart for the load forecast in gigawatt hours by months, by rate schedule for phases 1, 2, and 3. Resource portfolio, this is the next one. And on resource portfolio, you can do just about anything you want. For you, there's probably 2 constraining factors. One is the state renewable portfolio standard, the RPS standard, so you've got to have so much renewable, you can't change that. And secondly, your JPA agreement talks about having better greenhouse gas count numbers than what PG&E does. So you've got those 2 things to deal with, but other than that, it's wide open. And so we got to thinking about it and thought, why don't we just bracket reality to begin with, where option 1 is the least you can do on RPS, and option 2 is the most you can do. So option 1, we've assumed just for the budget purposes to be the default. I mean, that's what people get on if they don't opt up. And then option 2 is voluntary. They could just opt up to 100% if they wanted. Most of the CCAs we work for usually have at least 2 options, and most of them have 3. Like LA and San Jose and people like that, they've got something in between 1 and 2, or maybe it's 50% renewable rather than the minimum at 100. And that's something we could use direction back tonight on from you. If you want to go just with the high and the low, that's fine. If you want to have 3 options or 4 options and put something in between those 2, that's fine too. We just need to know. And to Nick's point again, the final, all this has got to be laced around or hooked up around what our actual power costs would be. Because we have to be. Your JPA agreement says you're supposed to be competitive with PG&E, and how much renewable you can have, which is of course more expensive than the other kind of power. That's going to cut down on your competitiveness and raise rates. And we just got to know what the renewable prices are, so we make sure, regardless of how much renewable we have, we're still competitive with PG&E, and we don't know that yet.
Mr. Chair, once again, our CEO would like to just offer perspective.
Yeah, great.
So let's go back 1 slide. So I think just wanted to offer sort of a similar perspective on this one, but just sort of to make a fine point on it, that for the purposes of the implementation plan, offering the benefit of offering bookends with some language that sort of says, say for option 1, which is your default rate, this is sort of the baseline. It will not be any lower from a GHG standpoint than this baseline, and based on market conditions, our goal would be to exceed this, be it 40%, 50%, 70. So this would be roughly a 70% GHG mix. You maybe want to get to 75, 80. But again, you have to go to market. You have to understand, what are the cost implications of going from 35 to 40 to 45. And so I think part of my hesitancy to sort of put too much detail here is there may be real cost differentials between 38% renewable and 40%. And if we leave ourselves some flexibility in the implementation plan, then we actually go to market, we determine sort of what the best options are. We come back to the board, we work with the Community Advisory Council to actually determine what is the best, sort of most cost-effective, least carbon initial sort of option 1 product. And perhaps there should be an intermediate 50% or 60% product. But if we leave ourselves the flexibility in the implementation plan, we have more options when we're actually thinking about actual procurement decisions than having to say, well, we've said we're going to do 3, now we have to do 3. And if we decide that 3 is not the best path to go, then we have to go back to the commission. I think if we say we're going to do 2, we start with 2 and we include those caveats. If we decide we want to go to 3, that's actually an option. And maybe, if Sean, could you just confirm that for me, that in the implementation plans, if you sort of suggest that sort of here's the option 1 and 2 and we may consider a 3rd, we're not going to define what that is, that's probably going to be, that will pass muster.
It will. You just need to establish your floor and you can exceed it.
Right. So I think that's sort of that's the philosophy here. Sean said you need to establish a floor and you can exceed it. The philosophy here is let's establish sort of the baseline, and then actually let's get into assessing what things will actually cost and then come back with a proposal. So.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Okay. Thank you. I hear some kind of ringing. Is somebody looking into that?
Yes.
It's not an alarm or anything. Okay. Keep an eye out for smoke, anybody? All right, continue.
Yeah, that could be the fire. That may be next door. Yeah. So more assumptions. This is assumption laden. Data management, we've assumed $1.15 a customer a month. That's in the ballpark with what Calpine's been bidding other places. Uncollectibles, 0.5% of 1%. Billing costs are about 44 cents a customer per month. That's a CPU schedule. And you've got a couple loans outstanding. We've assumed that the first loan that you got from the county would be repaid over 2 years at 5%. And the second loan you're going to have to get for cash working capital, which is a bigger number, be repaid over 5 years at 5%. And that's all pretty much in keeping with what the other CCDs have been getting for financing metrics. On power, again, this is 90% of your budget, but we are in the market weekly looking at power quotes. We either get bids on behalf of other CCAs or somebody does a deal that's in the paper. So plus we talk with the schedulers and marketers quite a bit. So we have pretty good information about current prices. Having said that, you never know for sure until you actually go out with an RFP and get a deal done and sign a contract. You know, you just never know until you get that far down the road, and we're not there. So for purposes of this, you've got market, you've got renewable, and you've got the PCIA, which are the two big issues there. And we've assumed market power is about $28 a megawatt hour, which is about what it is. It is what it is right now, with a 3.5% escalator over the 3-year period. On renewable, we've got $41 for the default, because there's all kinds of renewable that you can buy, as you probably know. You can buy desert utility scale solar, PV, and one of the munis just bought some of that for around $30, which I was impressed. But the market, as we see, it's more closer to 40. And for opt-up, where it's 100%, we've assumed there that you would opt up for, you wouldn't have all solar in that renewable. You would have some wind and you'd have some geothermal, which is more expensive. So we've melded in a blend for the opt-up of wind, geothermal, and solar. The default's just solar only. And then on the PCIA, we've assumed that overall it's about $20 a megawatt hour. It's higher than that for residential and lower than that for commercial, but on average it's about $20 a megawatt hour. We've assumed that's going to go up 10% in the base case, because it's been bouncing around and it's going to go up. Launch schedule we talked about, what we're assuming in the base case. On staffing, we've assumed that initially there'll be about 6 people to help Nick. He'll pick it up to about 10 at some point and then have 14 or so. That's just a guess on our part. That's a CEO decision. He's got to get in here and see how he wants to do it and how not to do it. But for purposes of the budget, again, we had to put something in for staffing, and that's what we've got in the budget at this point. So we got a drum roll. So here we've got, it's a typical common income statement sheet. And you've got 2017, 18, 19, and 20 across the top. And you got revenues at the top. You got expenditures. Then you've got surplus or deficit is what we're calling it. And you can see in the first year, you're not going to have any money coming in, but you're spending money, so you're short. And that's where your startup cash is going to cover that. In the second year, in 18, you can see you're starting to get your cash flow going. You got your munis online for a full year, and you got some of your C&Is on for a part of the year, and you're about $17 million to the good. And then by 19, you're in full operation. Everybody's signed up. Everybody's going. It looks like the cash flow is going to be such you've got 75 or 80 million dollars to deal with. Now the surplus number at the bottom can go for any number of things, but 3 primarily. One would be a rate discount, your 2, 3, 4, 5%, whatever you want for a rate discount. The second would be it could go towards building financial reserves, which we're going to come back to. I think we're going to give you an opinion. You ought to have some money in the bank to take care of problems. And then the third thing you can put it into is projects, local projects. So what we're trying to do here is to quantify for you roughly how much cash you have to work up to do probably all 3 of those things. So here's some metrics for you. You've got it, once you get going, you've got that, let's say $75 million a year to figure out what to do with. For every $5 million of that surplus you use, you can lower rates 1%. So if you took $25 million out of that $75 million, you could have a 5% rate reduction. The second thing is, and I'm going to explain this more, but we think you should have 45 days worth of operating revenues and reserves, 12.5%. That's sort of the standard that we see, and that's about $60 million you're going to need. So another option, well, that's the second one. The third one, to put it on new projects, and you could put, let's say you wanted to spend $10 million a year on local renewable projects, you could buy or own 7 megawatts of utility-sized solar with a generation of about 11 gigawatt hours, which is about, it's a small percentage of the load, but it's in there. So that's another place you could spend it. So what are the trade-offs? Well, some of the trade-offs are if you've got the 75 million that you have to deal with, you could have up to a 10% rate reduction, or you could build all your reserves in 1 year, or you could probably serve 10% of your load with local renewables, or some combination of the above. So that's, again, we don't have to decide. You wanted to see some budget numbers and some idea how much cash we're looking at? Well, that's what we're trying to do here. So let's do a sensitivity analysis. Let's do the expedited phase-in case. So expedited phase-in, we've assumed, is we're on May 1 of next year, we hook up your munis and your small commercials, all your small commercial customers, plus your volunteers. And in September, you let everybody come on. So we skip that middle phase. In the base case, we had the munis and we had the commercial, industrials, and residential. We're saying put the small commercial into phase 1 and then put everybody else into phase 2. So you've just got 2 phases instead of 3. And you can see there, we'd be going from about 40,000 at startup as far as number of customers, and you go to that 540,000. So it's the same jump. That's that same $500,000 in account jump, which we'd have to work out with PG&E, but that's what this assumes. Well, what's that do to cash flow? Well, basically, in the first year, in 17, it doesn't do anything because there's nothing going on other than you're spending money. But in 18, you would bring people on more quickly. And by bringing everybody on in September rather than waiting until the end of the year, you pick up about $15 million in cash flow. It goes from 17 million cash flow to about 32, so that's your 15 million bucks. So by expediting the phase-in schedule by 4 months, you pick up 15 million in cash. So and then from then on, it's the same as the base case because everybody's going to be in and everybody's going to be in. The only difference is you're going to, under this expedited, you're going to bring them all in 4 months earlier, basically, in 2018. And that picks up 15 million. How about the PCIA? Everybody's followed the PCIA. That's been the bugaboo for the CCAs for some time because it's a function of the PUC and how they set rates for the IOUs, and it's unpredictable and it's not transparent, and that's one of the things that we worry about at night, and we spend a lot of time working on. But just right now, it's at $20 a megawatt hour, and in the base budget, we've assumed it's going up 10% a year. Well, you probably saw that the investor-owns filed this PAM proposal, which was supposed to be an alternative to the PCIA. And in the PAM proposal, if they went that way, it was going to double the PCIA. It'd go from 2 cents to 4 cents on the PG&E system if they adopted this new method. The Utility Commission has said we're not going to go down that road. The IOUs tried to have an expedited hearing, try to get this PAM in to replace the PCIA. The Commission said, no, we're not going to go that way. We're going to have a full rate setting process, and we're going to look at it good, which is good. That's good for us because we need more transparency and more people to look at it and make sure we get a fair shake on this because it's a big deal. But the IOU proposal back on the PAM doubled the PCIA. So we thought, okay, well, that's probably as bad as it could get. What would happen if this new proceeding on the PCIA increased it by 50%? Let's say it went from $20 to $30. That would decrease your operating surplus when you were going from about 75 million to 25 million. So a 50% increase in the PCIA takes $50 million out of your cash flow. It's material. And that's sort of that's one of the reasons we're going to talk to you about having some operating reserves, some financial reserves, because you could easily be in midstream on rates, and the PUC could say we're going to increase the PCIA by 50%, and all of a sudden, your cash flow drops by $50 million. What do? Do you raise rates to cover that, or do you have a reserve to take care of that till things stabilize? So that's hard decisions. So, I've been talking, Mr. Vice Chair, I'm sorry, I've been talking fast. We had a lot of material to get through. So let me recap real quickly what we need to talk about, and then we'll come back and maybe if you probably want to talk some about some of this, then we can go back and hit them in more detail. But I'll just go through them quickly. On governance, the statement of intent, service territory, termination of the JPA, that's all JPA language. We're fine there. On admin and finance, staffing structure, we talked about that. We haven't talked about exit fees tonight, but we did before. That's what happens if somebody wants to leave the CCA after their 60-day grace period. Do you try to charge them for all the power supply you bought for them, or do you just charge an administrative fee? How's that work? That's the issue on that. And then on startup and capital, we got the county loan to begin with, and I think we're going to suggest you go through a process, hire a financial advisor, and get a bank lined up. On tariff structures, the issues there are your rate design. Are you going to mirror PG&E's, or are you going to go with your own set of rates? What's your desired discount? In a perfect world, how low would you go? And then what's your process going to be? You're going to have public meetings. You're going to get in the back room and figure it out. You got to lay out what you're going to do there. On phasing, the same thing. We went through a couple options here. There's probably 100 options for phasing. We need to get that nailed down. Resource portfolio, that's where we've got two options now, option one, option two. You can go with that, or we could come up with something in the middle, or something completely different if that's the way you want to go. And what programs to offer. What kind of local programs. You've got net energy metering, feed-in tariffs, demand response, electric vehicle. There's a whole list of them. What do you want to do on that at this point? So with that, Mr. Vice Chair, I'll take a deep breath, and you can decide. You tell us how you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know we want to hear, there was deliberations on this at the Community Advisory Committee, so we'd want to hear whatever thoughts that advisory committee has wanted to share for today, and then we have at least 3 public speakers. If anybody else is interested in speaking on this item and you haven't handed in a card, please hand in a card right away. I'm fine asking our Community Advisory Committee chair, our board member, Ms. Eldred, if she wants to share some of the thoughts and recommendations on some of the key matters that we'll have to make some decisions on, or make recommendations on, maybe not final decisions today. Now, if you'd like to do that.
Thank you. I understand that at our first meeting, we came together and went through the recommendations that the board had had asked staff direction on, whatever was concrete at that point, and realized that because of the really phenomenal makeup of our committee, good job on that, y'all, that there were certain items that we were able to make concrete recommendations on, but that several of them required having a budget. So we did get that budget on Monday afternoon. We met on Tuesday. We are here today. Some of the items we had pretty strong and lengthy deliberation on. And some of them will simply require a more granular budget. Like, we will need a better budget to make an informed recommendation. In the packet that you have on each item, there is something included in red. So in the black, there is the staff recommendations. In the red, there is the CAC's recommendations. And on those points that we had lengthy deliberation, we wrote down, these are the factors that we took into consideration. Like, this is how we went with it, but these are the things that went into consideration. There was a couple items that we had a very split board. If I had weighed in, there would have been more ties. And so that at this point, we would ask that you also take those things into consideration. And on some items, we will simply need a stronger budget. So if you want me to go through them all now, I could do that, but if you're going to be going through each of the items, I can simply weigh in at that time.
At your discretion, and you could certainly choose to focus on the ones where there is some clear recommendation from your committee, whereas ones where there is still pending information needed, meaning you don't necessarily have a clear recommendation, you could hold off on those as you see fit. It's up to you.
I would say that I would like to echo the sentiments that were stated earlier about the level of detail that is traditionally included in an implementation plan. I have now read 4. They're not that interesting. And they are all different, but there's a lot of areas where it seems like we're trying to put specific details that are unnecessary and may serve to limit our options in the future. So in all cases, in the areas where it is best to keep the implementation plan general, we recommend that you do so. In certain areas, we want there to be, this is our intention and we will do this.
Okay, so no, that's fine. So what I'd like to do now, I think, is maybe hear from the public speakers, and then we could come back up on each of the items one at a time and have a discussion up here and weigh in to the extent that you hear some direction, a consensus direction up here or not, that will help answer some of your questions. And if our incoming CEO has additional recommendations, he's here as well to weigh in. So I'm going to call the public speakers, and okay, Al Weinreb, Barbara Stebbins, Tom Kelly, and Jeremy Wynn, sorry. In any order, please come on up.
Well, good evening, folks. Al Weinreb of the Local Clean Energy Alliance. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. It's a little bit hard without having heard some of the discussion and the recommendations of the Community Advisory Committee, although I'm pretty familiar with what they are, and mostly I was going to try to strengthen what some of those recommendations are. So let me just say 2 things, at this point in time. Maybe I'd have the opportunity to come back. But first, to underline what Nick Chassett said about the nature of the implementation plan, and also Ms. Eldred said, is that getting into the details in this plan are not a good idea. We need to just set really minimal levels that don't really prevent us from doing what we want to do. One of the areas that I would like to address more directly is the question of a phase-in. The law doesn't actually mandate that the implementation plan describe phase-in. It's something that just has arisen, in the history of community choice programs. Most community choice programs have said, well, we intend to phase our customers in this way or in that way. And so what we would recommend is, in terms of phase-in, that there be a very general statement that talks about some general principles in terms of phasing in, but underlines the fact that we have a local development business plan underway, and that local development business plan is going to provide you all a roadmap and some suggestions of new programs, local programs that need to be developed. Those programs cannot be developed unless there's enough cash on hand to be able to invest in staff and program development. So our concern is largely with the launch of the program in the first 2 years and the amount of cash that's available in order to put into these kinds of programs, so that the $500,000 that you all are spending for the local development business plan can actually be realized in some fashion. So in that sense, we want to make sure that the rollout takes place as expeditiously as possible and doesn't start, inordinately small. So the scenarios that you've seen up here so far have been extremely small. The one that's called the base case is 4,000 out of 6,000 customers, less than 1% of the load, and that means it's going to generate no cash whatsoever in real terms. That's the time when we want to be starting to generate revenue and so on. So my time is up, but I mean, that's our main concern, is to not undercut the local development business plan by having an ultra-conservative rollout process.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker, please.
Barbara Stebbins, I'll echo what Al had to say about making sure that we, in doing the rollout, that we wind up with enough cash that we can do some of the programs that we're looking forward to being recommended by the local development business plan. I would also point out that starting with less than 1%, all municipal, I'm not quite sure how that helps you deal with the problems that might arise when you roll in the other 99% that are largely residential and commercial customers. The other thing I'd like to point out is that having a base case that is the same as PG&E's is I realize that is not a recommendation. That's simply a base case to work from, but it will be great to see other scenarios, since as a steering committee, we never considered anything really under 50% renewables to start. So hopefully, I'm hoping that this board, as you get into actually looking at what the load case will be, or the renewable portfolio will be, will certainly be thinking more in terms of at least 50% to start. We also have really strong feelings about allowing certain municipalities to opt in at a default of 100%, that we feel there's a real danger in there. We would like that not to be included as a possibility in the implementation plan, and you'll hear that actually from Anna Olivia later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 2 more speakers. There we go.
Good evening, Tom Kelly, Sequoia Foundation. Just wanted to echo Barbara's concern about starting this off at base case that's equal to PG&E. I mean, we all know that we've gone through this process. We had hoped to significantly exceed PG&E on GHGs and renewable content. So for the purpose of developing a budget and for looking at where your the resource plan, I would encourage you to also, in parallel, look at that particular scenario so that you're at least working from data that is probably much more likely to inform your decisions on how you go forward. The last 2 programs to launch, Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley, both have 50% renewable in their mix and 75% GHG and 100% GHG-free products. So it just seems like that's the direction we're heading in. But the 2 things I wanted to mention was that lots of cities now are enrolling their municipal accounts at 100% right off the bat. I think almost all the cities in Peninsula Clean Energy have done that, and I'd urge you to incorporate that into the way you're analyzing this, because it helps you get to your climate action plan goals a lot more quickly. The cost isn't that significant, and rather than come at it later on, I think that would be a good way to plan. The third thing is the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has in the process of contracting with us to do a study on what it would mean to go to 100% renewable as a default for all customers, not just customers who opt up. And the reason for that is that the costs are coming down significantly. Secondly, it's almost impossible to get people to opt up from whatever the base case is. Even Marin Clean Energy only has about 2% of its customers at the 100% level. So this study that will be done by Ben Foster of Fostera Clean Energy, together with us, will actually be looking at the implications of 100% renewable energy default product with an opportunity to opt down to whatever everybody else is getting. So I just want to put that out there. The cities of Albany, Berkeley, Hayward, and Piedmont have expressed an interest in this. One city, Portola Valley, which is not an example of the demographics that most of our cities has already done this and has done so successfully. But I just point out that when Marin Clean Energy started, everybody thought they were kind of different than everything else, and yet now many of the programs coming into existence are actually doing much better than them. So anyway, wanted to put that out there so that that didn't get lost in the shuffle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi there. You did get my name right the first time, Jeremy Wayne. I'm just here as an interested member of the public, though I did serve as the Senior Regulatory Analyst for MCE for 5 years, ending in March of this year. In that time, MCE's service went from 13,000 accounts to 255,000 accounts. In that time, they amended their implementation plan many times. So on this topic in particular, I'd urge to allow for flexibility and brevity as far as what you include in your implementation plan. The letter of the law is that the Commission needs to certify the plan. It's a lighter touch than if they have to formally approve the plan. So I would certainly look to what the prior CCIs have done and err on the side of brevity and flexibility for yourselves. Also, to play off something that Gary said earlier, the PCIA is absolutely one of the cardinal concerns for CCAs. It's easily the biggest external threat to CCAs. And even in the last couple of years, we have seen that rate double already without a change to the methodology. So it can be quite volatile. That said, the factors at play are starting to slow down, so I don't think we're going to be seeing a doubling coming up. But the point is that I would urge you to focus on building up a safe reserve to allow for adjustments to rates as they go on, and adjustments in particular to the PCIA as they go on. And one final thought in terms of the phasing. Just another complication to consider is that PG&E's rates don't stay constant. They do change at the very minimum. They're going to change every January 1 of each year. And in that time, both the bundled rate and the PCIA rate will change. So in terms of communicating to your customers, in terms of trying to set exactly how many percents of cheaper or cents cheaper you want to be on a kilowatt hour basis, just keep in mind in terms of phasing that if you have a phase before a January 1 increase and a phase after, it's going to complicate matters versus, as some have pointed to, of just doing a larger enrollment and getting it all through the door. So, thank you all.
Thank you very much. And we have one more public speaker, Jessica Tovar.
Hi, Jessica Tovar, East Bay Clean Power Alliance, and we've had extensive conversations about concerns around having a default start at 100%, particularly because it does impose pretty much a higher bill for some people, and I'm speaking from my own experience as a low-income person of color, who has had my lights turned out when my mom could not pay her bill. And a lot of you have actually spoken very deeply about providing affordable rates, competitive rates to PG&E. One of the things that, we see this 100% default is actually as a community choice killer, because if a person receives a bill and the bill is higher than what it was before in PG&E, their instinct is to hate the program and go back to PG&E. It also gives ammunition for folks who actually have been in opposition of community choice traditionally throughout the years. Now, granted, let me remind you that this legislation was passed very early on, years and years ago, back in 2002, I think it was. Anyways, we advocate that you don't start at a default, but that you actually embody the fact that you can make this program give people the choice of starting at a base that's competitive with PG&E or doing more than that. So just think about that and think about the people that it would affect. I think it's more of a marketing and outreach issue. If you want to educate people to support community choice, you're going to have to do that work. It's going to take time, and if you want them to opt up to the 100%, that should be part of your marketing and your. But you have to give that power to the ratepayers to do so. If you start off at 100%, you're going to kill your own program, and you're going to be out of business, and you're going to make a lot of your opposition very happy.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are all the public speakers. Thank you for those comments, very helpful. I would suggest if you come on up again, we should, and come back to the slide that summarizes the subtopics that we want to weigh in on. And I don't think we'll have lengthy discussions on all those topics. And many of these we had initial discussions at our, if I recall, at our last meeting. And I don't know if that was helpful as well. And let's get some clarity. So what are we looking for today? I mean, we're not making final decisions today, right?
Several people have talked about, we are going to stay away from trying to paint you in a box on this implementation plan. We'd like to be able to say that the board is cognizant of these issues, lay out a process by which you're going to decide what to do, and pretty much stop there. And so we just, as an example, we'd like to know whether you want. We would like to know whether you want 2 or 3 different options on power supply. You know, in the implementation plan, we could say something as simple as we're going to have the minimum is going to be the RPS plus 10% less greenhouse gas, the maximum 100, and the board is going to look at something in the middle based on power prices or something.
I understand. So let's bring up the slide, if we can, that summarizes or lists the subtopics that we would have to weigh in on in some fashion.
Mr. Vice Chair, I've got the summary on one page, and I've got these here which deal with them, just one on each page with some more detail, and I'm happy to use whichever one you want.
The one with a little more detail of each one might be a little helpful.
Okay.
If we can go back to that. Do you have the clicker?
It's right up there now, I think.
Okay.
Governance is our first one.
Got it. Okay. So, sorry? Yeah.
Pardon me, Vice Chair, you had one more speaker before you go in.
I do?
Cynthia Landry.
My apologies, Cynthia Landry. Where is it? Oh, I missed it, my apologies. One more public speaker. And a member of our Community Advisory Committee.
Yeah, do you turn your mic on? Yes, press the middle button.
I just wanted to clarify because a couple of us were there, are in the room, and I wanted to clarify the CAC voted to oppose the whole community 100% renewable enrollment. That was a split vote, essentially. Was my recollection, it was 4 to 3. So I just wanted to clarify that. That's my recollection.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm sorry, did you want to weigh in on that?
That is why on that item we have everything listed out about the things that were taken into consideration, and thank you for that. That is one of the ones we had excessive deliberation on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So come on back up, and we're going to the first subtopic is governance, which we did have some discussion last time, and much of that is really answered in the JPA agreement. Is there a particular element of that that is unanswered that you need some board feedback on?
I don't believe so.
Does anybody here think they need some feedback on any? Okay, so let's skip over that one for now. On all of these, of course, we would hope you would keep in touch with our soon-to-be CEO, even over the next couple of weeks before he's officially the CEO, because his input is important. So let's go to the next one. Next slide.
Next one's admin and finance, and the question there is staffing structure, exit fees, and startup capital. And on staffing structure, what we usually put in an implementation plan is we're going to use our consultants initially until we can get staffed up, and then once we get staffed up, we'll have to decide whether we want to staff up some more or keep using consultants. But keep it general. Just say initially we've got a core group that's going to be able to run things, which is what the commission wants to hear, and that over time we'll evaluate. The CEO will evaluate how he wants to handle the rest of the operation.
I think that's fine. If there are any comments, my initial comment would be, as with any agency, you hire a CEO, and the CEO spends time looking at everything and recommending staff and a staffing structure and consultants and so on. And you could just put that in explicitly if that would be helpful. Any other comments up here on the staffing structure question? Yes.
The only additional feedback from the advisory committee is that we do not include the actual org chart, but rather a more general list of departments or deputy hired positions like in other implementation plans.
Yeah, I have no objection to that. An org chart might be too much detail before we even know what we're going to hire. So, right. Unless there's a requirement that they need something like that.
No, we just generally speaking, we're going to have a operations, a finance, a power supply, and a legal department, or something.
Customer service.
Customer service, okay. Right.
Any other comments, fellow board members?
Mr. Vice Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
The only thing I'd like to say on this and all of the other thematic comments around building in flexibility, which I don't believe there's any disagreement around that. Please keep in mind that the Commission has certified very, very similarly structured implementation plans, and that I believe there's common agreement and was some discussion around following their previous lead so as not to open the Pandora's box for a laundry list of questions and lengthy back and forth. So I encourage you to put as much detail in as we can while not being overly specific. So for example, if there is an org chart, for example, that the CEO is comfortable with and it is there for illustrative purposes, I don't see any problem with adding some specificity where we can. So just as a general comment, please don't go too far in watering this down. Thank you.
Okay, those PUC bureaucrats, you never know what they're going to do. Okay, in case they're listening, I'm just kidding.
Off the record, I'll tell you a story about this sometime you'd find humorous. The next is exit fees, and this applies where if a person wants to opt out, they can opt out 60 days after the program starts, no harm, no foul. The question is, what do you do about somebody that opts out after the 60-day grace period's over? And you've gone out and you've committed to buy some electricity for that customer, presumably. How do you deal with that? Do you make them take their electricity with them, or do you charge them an exit fee, or what's the deal there? We think that if an individual residential customer leaves, they should have to pay some kind of an admin cost because you've got to take them off the records. And the math looks like it's about $5 for residential and maybe $25 for non-residential for an administrative cost, which would be roughly cost-based. To get people off the records after the free time. We wouldn't, there's a couple other things. You can maybe give them a year's grace period instead of 6 or 60 days if you want, so you can extend that. But whatever period you want to give them before they charge them, we think some nominal amount like this to cover your admin cost is the way to go.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions on that, if I may. One, I think part of the discussion last time, including our chair, was looking at a 6-month or 1 year for the initial, our initial group of customers coming in, to give them a lengthier period of time as a kind of a customer service kind of invitation before it. And then people who come in, who join later on, new people moving in or what have you, then it might go down to 60 days or 90 days or something like that. I think that's what I heard people talk about last time. Do others recall that, or was I dreaming about that?
No, that's accurate.
Okay, yeah. So there might be a 6-month or 1 year initial period before you charge something. My other question is, I can't remember if I asked this last time. You mentioned $5 or $25. This we roughly cost-based, so we're not losing money on the transaction of losing the customer in the transaction in and of itself. Do we have, under Prop 26, can we even charge more if we wanted to? Does legal counsel have an answer to that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one?
Yeah, we're charging a fee for someone, we're identifying a fee for someone to leave. Clearly, we have the authority to recover more or less our costs of that transaction or that work. Are we legally allowed to charge more without a vote of whoever?
No, you would be limited to recovery of costs. In the case of someone leaving the CCA, I think most CCAs charge a pretty nominal fee that's less than, they don't charge for any stranded costs due to, we're entering into these large purchase agreements, and therefore, if, a large number of customers left, we might be holding on to energy that we can't sell, and those costs are not usually included in the individual administrative, termination cost for most CCAs. So I believe most CCAs are charging well under actual costs to the CCA.
So I think what we would need, because cities do this when we look at our own fees for what have you, and when we're looking to raise a fee, we have to justify it to say we're raising this fee because our costs are more. We have a whole analysis that has to happen. So would we not need some analysis at some point by next year? Come on up. But by next year, in order to justify whatever fee, even if we choose a fee that's less than we're allowed to, we still need some analysis to justify the fee at all, I believe.
Again, I think just for the purposes of, no, this is fine. For the purposes of the implementation plan, I believe what the direction from the board was actually from you was specifically to focus on, a period of time, be it 6 months or a year, where you maintain an administratively set fee, $5, $25, which would be viewed as significantly below. But at a certain point in time, you set a cost-based fee. We don't know what cost is going to be. You're going to have to go through a cost of service study, and it'll be based on what kinds of positions you have with contracts, short-term versus long-term. And that's should suffice for the purposes of the implementation. Again, we're talking about the implementation plan, not sort of the broader policies or the broader sort of costs that we're going to be applying to customers. And so the problem is if you sort of are too explicit here, then you have to go back to the commission and say, no, well, after further analysis, we decided it should be something else. So again, for the purposes of this, I think we want to try to give ourselves the flexibility to determine what cost-based is and put in place a process to do that analysis.
So to actually say in the implementation plan, here's an initial starting exit fee, but our long-term fee will be based on some cost analysis to be done in the future. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Correct, and I think that's how that would be the best way to justify a higher fee later, potentially. Right. And the implementation plan could keep it pretty simple and say, we believe this cost is well below the actual cost to the agency, and of course we won't adopt any fees that exceed our costs at any point.
Okay. Any comments from board members?
Is it okay?
Yes. Yeah.
If it's okay, I'd just like to one additional point of information on this particular topic. We do have Dan Lieberman in the audience from Peninsula Clean Energy. They made a decision, along with a couple of other new CCAs, to not charge administrative exit fees for a period of 1 year from the point of enrollment. Now, you may choose not to do that because there are a number of other CCAs that have the $5, $25 floor as just a starting point. So I don't know if you want to hear more about that or not.
Not today.
Okay.
And again, I think what we want to say here is, I think we wanted to do some additional sort of analysis of what the implications of a variety of different exit fee scenarios would be, looking also at historical sort of opt-outs over a course of 3 months, 6 months, a year. And then you looking at sort of even longer term opt-outs, then you start to evaluate what are the budget implications of not having a fee, having it be cost-based, having it be administratively set. But again, for the purposes of the administration plan, the implementation plan, what what gives us the most degrees of freedom so that we can then sort of take a step back and actually do a more sort of go through a more robust process internally of coming up with a set of proposals that are based on analysis and some research, as opposed to saying, well, this is what we could work. If we don't need to make those sort of very specific decisions today, I would recommend putting it off to the future.
Okay, Ms. Eldred.
Don't specify.
And then Al.
So at your last meeting, the CEO did request that the financial impacts be assessed in the draft budget being prepared. As we do not have a budget of that level of granularity at this point, the CAC recommends that exit fees be described as cost-based but not specific at this present, because that is consistent with other implementation plans and can be turned in and approved and not delay the implementation plan going forward, and still give us the ability to look at that and amend it in the future.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Al.
So my question was to our CEO, if that description is what you're looking for, or if we need something that's more like, well, in the first year it's going to be a nominal fee without specifying dollar amounts, with it to be set based on cost thereafter, or
well, I think setting it based on sort of stating the implementation is based on cost. I mean, you can sort of define costs in a variety of ways, right? You can say, well, during that initial period, if it's the will of the board that we set it based on some administrative costs, like what is the cost of porting an account? That could be how we define costs for the first 6 months. And then at some point we say, well, we're also now going to start including the cost of procured power and, essentially what the utilities do with the PCIA, right? They have procured power, and they look at the differential between what they sell it for in the market and what they're contracted for, and that's what makes up the PCIA. So you could say in the future, you say we're going to develop a cost-based method where we include both administrative costs and other factors, other cost-based factors. So I think, yes, exactly what the CAC is recommending is what I would prefer and recommend for the purposes of the implementation plan. If we have to put specific dollars in there, then...
So that makes sense. And does that run into the concern that I don't know, Sean, I'm sorry, that you were raising earlier about deviating too much, or does that fall within the...
Not on this one.
Okay.
No.
All right, then. Okay, any other comments from board members on this item? Okay, do you feel you have some guidance on this matter?
I heard a lot of different ideas. Our sense is you got to go with a $5 charge. Give them 6 months grace before you do anything, and after 6 months, charge them $5 for residential, $25 for commercial. I think that's being kind from a cost causation standpoint.
It's not what we were just talking about, and so I think what our CEO is advocating for, and what I would tend to agree with, is to be a little bit more vague than that and say it's going to be cost-based, and sort of leave it at that. You might have a for instance in there, but to provide that flexibility so that we're not locked into a particular fee even for the first year or two.
Yeah.
And there would be explicit reference to an analysis that would eventually lead to a more long-term set of fees in this matter.
Okay. Can do.
Okay. All right. What's next?
The last one in this area was startup funding and your capital requirements. And that part of it, what we just, like I say, we talk about the county line coverage to begin with. That's where your startup came from. That's going to be repaid. You're going to get a FA and a banker and go out and figure out how much working capital you need given the nature of your power supply contracts, and you'll get the best deal you can on long-term financing. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Any comments from board members on this? Okay. We want free money. Okay.
We'll try.
Next.
Yeah. Next one's on tariffs. And the issue there is rate design, the desired discount from PG&E, and what your process is going to be. And I think last time there was a lot of head shaking up and down about mirroring, at least initially, what the PG&E rates are with a discount. On the question of discount, we don't know what the discounts are possible until we figure out what your power supply costs are, what your surplus is, and then how you want to spread the surplus among those three competing factors. So I think we just, on that one, you just say we plan on having rates that are competitive, and we're going to have to get power supply costs and do some math before we can specify a number. And then on the rate setting process, I'd defer to council on this, but typically, for rate setting, you put a notice, you just have the standard notice provisions, like if you were going to raise your water or wastewater rates for one of your cities. You have the notice, have a hearing, take public comment, let it sit for a couple days, adopt it. We've got some standard language from that. We'd run it past your attorney and make sure that was all in keeping with what you wanted to do.
Well, let's take those one at a time. So the rate design and the discount, that can be discussed together. The process, that's a separate question. So any comments on those first items? Yes.
So this was a lengthy discussion. We did pretty much consensus on this item. We recommend that the board approve language that allows EBCE to be flexible in adopting tariffs and structures so that it could follow the PG&E model or vary its tariffs to whatever degree desirable to fit local conditions. Their rates may change mid-something, like we need to have some flexibility built in there. And we don't yet know, because of the local development business plan not being completed yet, what our rollout will be there. So just building that flexibility in. We would like to see the addition of, and to better serve customers based on their needs in the same area where we talk about being able to set special rates for like commercial customers. I don't have that part memorized, sorry. That commercial customers, in order to provide incentives for them to remain engaged in the program, we want to just add an additional, and to better serve customers based on their needs, to address some of the residential as well. And tariffs, like, we need to have a better budget and to actually review it for a longer period of time to be able to make more solid recommendations than that at this point.
Okay, thank you. Additional comments? I know we talked about this a little bit last time. Nick.
So a couple of questions. One is, does this, is the consideration of low income, rates for low income, is that part of this discussion?
Yes, we'll talk about low income in the program section of the decisions, but yes, the intent from staff anyway is to, at a minimum, have what PG&E has for low income and possibly enhance that given budgeting and what you folks want to do.
What PG&E has being the CARE program, correct? Okay. Then I believe the Sierra Club letter and others have done this, have the rate be discount from the PG&E for the default option, but you're suggesting that it, or the previous discussion was that the rate be on par with PG&E for the default option. Is that correct?
The power supply mix would be equal on renewables and have 10% less greenhouse gas emissions.
But as far as the rate goes, the cost.
Again, most of the other CCAs mirror the PG&E rates with the discount, 2, 3, 4, 5%.
Okay.
We can't give you a discount until we get your power prices nailed down a little closer.
Okay, but we can say as a board that would be, if we can, our preference to give a discount in order for the program to be looked upon as favorable by the consumers.
Yes.
So, I mean, that would be my preference.
Okay.
Okay, so those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? I would add, I think it does make sense, initially at least, to have a rate that we know is going to be less than PG&E. Obviously, that's what's going to encourage people to stay with us and not opt out. I don't know if I would frame it as PG&E with a discount. I would just say it's a rate that's going to be some percentage less than PG&E, what PG&E is paying. But that's maybe more semantical or what have you. Is there a need in the implementation plan to convey in some fashion what our rate structure might be after the first few years, after we're kind of in place?
You can put something in if you want. I think the PUC is most concerned about what you're going to do initially. But you could put a paragraph in there saying we want to go this way initially, and we'll look at what our cost structure looks like down the road and deal with it accordingly.
Okay. All right. I don't want to just tie us in and having to go back to them 3 years later, 2 years later, or whatever years later and change it. As long as we're kind of letting them know, hey, this is what we're starting with. We'll see what goes on later.
Yeah. We've talked to as a sidebar, we talked to the PUC staff quite a bit about implementation plans, and they are real keen on knowing any changes in governance or in participants in the JPA. And a lot of this other stuff, if you wanted to send them a note and say we're changing, great, but they're not going to smack your hands if you don't.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
The CAC was on, so if we're doing that part, the CAC was another long deliberation. DUD did come to the conclusion that it would like to use the word competitive with PG&E as opposed to setting a specific amount so that we have the ability to adjust as needed without having to go back.
Okay. I think it's important to be clear that we're going to be less than PG&E without necessarily saying how much less. Competitive is a loosey term that does not convey what I just said. But I understand the sentiment. I think we understand the sentiment. Okay, any more comment? Nick?
Yeah, I just realized one more thing. There's not a discussion here of rate plans, of whether or not we're going to be offering the same plans, like time of use plans, versus how the metering is going to happen. I'm not suggesting that we do that now if we don't have to, except that I'm wondering if that will affect the budget. If we don't make this, depending on if our decisions about rate plans will affect the budget in a significant way. Could you speak to that?
The way we have the budget set up is that we take your revenues and we back out your operating expenses, your staffing and your power supply and your Cal ISO payments and all that, and there's a residual. And that residual then can go towards rate discounts, can go towards programs, it could go through all that.
So that's more seen as a program then, rather than something that you would make a decision at this time?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just agree with your comment about using the word less versus competitive. I think kind of echoing Ms. Tovar's comments, you're going to have people who are going to, if they see a $52 bill versus a $51 bill, they're going to scream as to why they have to pay an extra dollar. And people are going to be like that. So I really think that even if we undercut PG&E by a penny, I think that's the operating thing. Because people really are, I shouldn't be that judgmental, but a lot of people are that judgmental that they're that cheap that they're going to just, whatever the tiniest discount, they're going to run from our program.
Okay. Do you feel you have enough information on that for now to write something up as a draft?
We do.
Okay.
And on process, I'll work with council to make sure we get the right process language in.
Yeah, our council, we have consultants here. You're a consultant. Well, a lot of consultants everywhere. Okay. And so the other part was the rate setting process, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's important. Do you have some draft that you're already discussing that you mentioned just a little while ago?
Yes, we'll have something for that.
Okay. I would just say that I know you didn't really mean this, but the way you just kind of said casually just a few moments ago, post something, have a hearing, and a couple days later, that's not going to fly. No. A couple days, the Brown Act may have certain requirements, but we'll probably want to do something more than that. I can't speak for everybody else, but I would like to do something more than what the minimum is required under the Brown Act. And I think we'll want to show the public that we make our decisions in the public's eye and with plenty of time to comment and to react. And rate setting is one of those things people will want to have that time. Yes, Nick.
On the rate setting process, part of the startup is to mirror PG&E's rates, right? So to some degree, early on, there may not be much rate setting process. PG&E has a rate setting process, and that's a public process. And but I think one of the things that we'll want to discuss is the development of rates that are specific to this body, and certainly the process around developing those rates is going to be critical, right? So when PG&E goes through a rate setting process, that is a 12 to 18 month public process. So without a doubt, the structure and the policies that we develop to set rates are going to maybe not have that kind of a time frame, but we're going to have to be robust and very much based on public engagement. So just wanted to share that perspective.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Eldred.
We had lots of meetings to be able to weigh in on these specific things. We feel it is important that there is specific language included in this that states that EBCE board at a minimum on an annual basis will hold a public meeting and a written public comment process to review and update its basic rate structure and review the special needs. For example, net energy metering, feed-in tariffs, time of use rates, and other appropriate rate forms. But specifically putting in that there will be a written process, that it will be reviewed annually, that it will be public, and that we will look at what is appropriate was an unbelievably lengthy discussion, and important to all of us.
Okay. Any other comments? Do you have some clarity on some thoughts there? What you're hearing?
Sort of business as usual would be where the staff would come in with a budget at, say, October, November for your next year, 3 months before your next fiscal year. And with that budget, they would have a set of rates to where the rates collected what the budget was. So usually the rate setting process and the budget hook up together, which means there would be public input, significant vetting, room for people to have their comments about it, but that, assuming nothing strange happens, that's usually how the utilities will do it.
I think what you may be hearing is that we have agenda items, decisions to make on all sorts of things over the next decades and so on. Some things that we make will require, whether required by law or not, the public will desire a more in-depth process beyond maybe what the law requires. Present something, have a published comment period, notice and comment period over a month or two or what have you, another hearing afterwards, and then a decision. Even if we're not required to do that, I think on some key things that we will do on a regular basis or semi-regular basis, rate setting is one. I think what you're hearing is we're going to go above and beyond what we're required to do, even if it takes an extra couple months to do it. Is that?
That's fine, but we can't be. The amount of detail that needs to go into this document to capture that should be fairly minimal. If we want to say that we're going to have a robust, public outreach process or something along those lines for setting rates and that sort of thing, that kind of statement captures the essence of what you're saying without locking us into, 3-month, review periods or whatever, things like that could become restrictive later and force us to come back and revise our IP later on if we have a slightly different process.
I don't think we need to get too detailed, but mentioning that rate setting will include public hearing and a publicized public comment, notice and comment period, I don't think is a problem. Okay, any other comments on this matter? No. Yeah, just anybody else? Madam General Counsel?
Just something for the board to consider if the board would like to adopt a policy regarding how it would handle rate setting with establishing additional procedure. You could do that separately as a board policy and perhaps keep it at a pretty high level in the implementation plan, and that policy could be revised to reflect changes or things that are working or aren't working in the future. But would maybe provide some, additional reassurance to the public as well.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? No. Okay. So the next set of
next thing's phasing schedule, and
could we get that on our things here?
Just give it a second.
There we go.
And on phasing schedule, we can do it any way you want. Let's start with that. Just about anything that you come up with on this, we could accommodate. The only bugaboo, there's two bugaboos, I think, that I'll tell you about. One is I like to start slow because of the problems on startup. You've got new staff. You've got a new relationship with PG&E. They haven't sent bills to you. You haven't talked to their IT people, and vice versa. So I like to have a little warm up. I like to have a practice game before you go real, and that's part of what we're thinking. The other thing is we've got to clear. If you go quicker on implementation, you're talking about bringing in 500,000 customers in one slug, and I'm not comfortable. We've talked to PG&E enough about that to make sure they can do it. So, but other outstanding those two caveats, I think you can do whatever you want here. The expedited implementation provides you another $15-18 million in that first year operation, which is that's significant. So we just need some feedback about whether you think you want to start it slow, or do you want to kind of crank it up a little bit more to get the cash. I mean, that's sort of the trade-offs.
Al.
So I would agree with that. I want to get as many customers as quickly as possible for the revenue reasons. You made a good point about that. But it is extremely important to me that we do this right and that it go as smoothly as we possibly can make it go. And, starting the three-phase, starting with municipal and volunteers, I think if that's where we're going to make our mistakes, as you pointed out. And if it's the municipal customers and the volunteers that we are making mistakes with, they're more likely to forgive us. Once we get past that, to quickly sort of try to bring everyone else on, I think that's fine. And what we're looking at here, if I'm doing the math right, is about a 12 to 16 month cycle through at the end of which everyone will be enrolled. And I'm probably being a little generous on the upside there. So, 12 months, that's pretty good. And anyone who wants to come in sooner can come in sooner. So, is it going to cost us a little bit in revenue? Yes. Will it make things go smoother and upset fewer people? Yes. And to me, that's a logical trade-off.
Vice Chair.
Don.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's better to take a little slower, conservative approach to start with. We could always speed up if things work well, but to make a lot of mistakes early on and drive people away and cause issues by trying to go too fast is kind of counterproductive.
Vinny.
Yeah, I would just third that idea. I've seen enough IT rollouts go bad that, let's take it slow, let's get it right. Let's not get bad press. So, thank you.
Nick.
Generally in favor of that, although I'm a little bit concerned with the with not getting as much revenue in initially. However, if it all goes smoothly with the cities and everything looks good, we can accelerate. There's no reason we couldn't accelerate in the moment and decide, okay, we're ready to start phasing in the others earlier than we thought before. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Eldred.
Clarification, I thought from that presentation yesterday that PG&E can handle 600,000 customers at a time, but that the real issue is that they can only handle 600,000 at a time. So if more than one CCA is trying to roll out at the same time, whoever makes the commitment to those customers will lock it in, and then you might not get all your people even if you want them. Is that correct?
That's right, number one. Number two, PG&E hasn't hooked up 60,000 or 600,000 customers yet. They say they can, but the best they've done is about half that so far. So, they say they can do it, but they haven't yet.
All right. So this was another real meaty one. And we see that the challenge will be in balancing the need for EBCE's growth and learning curve with the need to create enough revenue to be successful. This will be a heart of a lot of things. we agreed completely on a specific set of wording that recommends phasing in customers with the highest margins and lowest risk of dissatisfaction, working with the local business development plan team and the CEO to refine as necessary as more granular budget and load data is available, and balancing the need for revenue generation and a sustainable rollout. That was consensed upon. There were two other things that weren't as universal, but the vote ended up with starting with 3 phases for rollout in the implementation plan, and it can be adjusted down as necessary, as was stated. And we did have a motion to specify a goal end date, and that did not pass, as there was some question around if you moved it up to 2018, would there be a different cost associated, whereas I heard a different argument about having to be able to set your prices for that. So the 100% we'll actually get into on the next item. We did advise including early adopters under all scenarios.
Thank you. Nick.
So that seems consistent with what we've been talking about, except we haven't talked about the end date scenario. I was advised, or I think it's perhaps in the Sierra Club letter, there's a recommendation for an end date, perhaps if only to make sure that the program, the phase-in, does not just go on and without a foreseeable end date. The example that was given is that in San Francisco, apparently, although they've started up, their rollout is very slow, and they're still rolling out to customers, and that very slow rollout could make the program look bad. So, what do you think about end dates?
In my view, everybody in this room is incentivized to get this going as quickly as possible. Because it enhances cash flow, you get more people participating in the program. I think that's all good. I don't see a downside to that. The only reason you would delay would be if something's not going well, and I would hate to be pushed into an end date when things aren't going well. So I
suggest an example there. So depending on the rollout, if you're finding yourself, say for your third tranche of customers, and it is October, November, you may not want to bring them in, and then 2 months later you get your new PCIA, and then suddenly the rates that you're offering them are going to change drastically. So there's a variety of factors around. And the fact, the commission is taking up a new PCIA docket, so they may change the structure of the PCIA. So there are these are unforeseen circumstances or foreseeable circumstances, but with unknown inputs that may want you to slightly delay or move more quickly, right? You may say, we want to move more quickly because, these are key dates. You also, you may want to have all your customers in no later than the summer of 2019, because summer rates, summertime's hotter, people are using more energy. That's a high revenue generation period. So, but again, these are a variety of dynamics which, in the context of an implementation plan, you may benefit from, not being too specific.
Right, and I wouldn't be in favor necessarily of a rigid end date where we would face penalties for not meeting it, but more of a goal which just kind of formally states what the consultant stated, which was that we all know we want to roll this out as quickly as possible. That's all. But I don't know if it's necessary or not, but I thought I'd bring it up for discussion.
Thank you. The comment I have. You've heard up here about the desire to, get a few customers and then try to work out bugs. The problem is, if you have too few customers, you don't yet know what your bugs are. And if all you're doing is municipal and county customers and maybe some other government agencies, you might have just 25 or 30 customers with a pretty small percentage of the load. That is not going to be enough to discover our bugs. And so I think in your first phase, we should have some of the smaller commercial, industrial, whatever you want to call them, accounts because whenever you put them in, that's when you're going to find out things. So why wait? Just doing 25 accounts or thereabouts for government entities is not enough to learn much and to see your bugs. So my recommendation, my personal recommendation is, in phase 1, include some of the commercial customers, and maybe, I think you said one of your options was smaller ones. I don't know how many of them or how you decide which ones, but if we want to work out bugs, we're going to have more than just 25 customers to find out what those bugs are.
Yeah. Right now, we estimate there's about 5,000 municipal and city accounts. So if you went with phase 1, as the base case did, that'd be 5,000 accounts. If you wanted to bring in your small commercials, that would add about another 35,000.
So who, 5,000? I mean, we have X number of cities, county, several government agencies like school districts, but how do you get to 5,000?
Every fire station,
yeah. That's all part of the city.
But they each have. So each of those separate buildings generally have a separate account. We have 9 fire stations in Hayward. All 9 have a separate account.
Yeah, if you own street lights, that's an account. Each street lighting area is a different account. Traffic signals would be another account because they've got meters on them. So yeah, we might be off a little on that, but there are thousands in that muni and county bucket.
Okay, all right, that's new information for me. Thank you.
Or perhaps another idea is just to be aggressive a bit, or more aggressive about getting those volunteers in as well, and those can be another pool of guinea pigs, if you will, that can help iron the bugs out.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. Okay. Any more comments on this item? Yes, staff.
I just have a comment. I'm just throwing this out here just to see if there's any traction to it. If you were going to add some additional accounts in the first phase, maybe you could identify accounts that would be, as the CAC put it, accounts that are maybe fairly hefty load, that would have also a high tolerance for weathering the storm of possible glitches and things like that might happen at startup. If there's a way to identify those statistically, or if there's a known group of customers who would have that characteristic, maybe you could add them in. I don't know if any of that's true, but it's something to think about maybe.
If I may.
Mr. Chair.
Diane and Al.
There's some groups like the Sustainability Circle that my city and a lot of corporations in the county have participated in that include businesses like Pixar, for instance, that would have a high tolerance for any funny business that might occur in a phase 1 implementation, for instance. And I think there are ways that, maybe when our CEO is onboarded, that we can research, what types of industries have already leaned towards trying to go lower their greenhouse gas emissions, for instance. And that data is available somewhere, and I think that maybe without being completely specific in the implementation plan, we can work together to market to those businesses.
So what I would say is that Dan, Bruce, and Diane, you're making a valid point, but I don't think that we need to change the language of the IP to achieve that, because we can always go a little faster. We can always move more people up into the first phase or the second phase. And we can, put in language in our in the IP that says we may accelerate, but here's the sort of outline, the 3-phase outline, and then 9 months from now or 8 months from now, we can make a decision about whether we want to try and accelerate and who, rather than trying to do that now and adding more specificity than is needed.
If we wanted to accelerate, I'm sorry, did you finish?
Yes.
Yeah, if we wanted to accelerate, you can't just call PG&E, hey, 2 weeks from now we're going to accelerate, or a month from now we're going to, I mean, they need pretty much lead time there, right? Or some real lead time. So accelerating is not as easy as we would hope it to be. We really need to plan ahead for this.
Yeah, you do, and you have to go through this. Every time you go to a next phase, you have to go through that notification process. You've got to give PG&E the customers you're talking about. You've got to get their names, addresses, phone numbers, and billing history, and all that stuff transferred over. You got to send them opt-out notices 60 days and 30 days ahead. So, and PG&E's got to be able to do it. So there would have to be some discussion with PG&E about whether we could accelerate past what we're talking about here. But we
don't need to decide that tonight.
No.
Whether it's 2 months from now or 6 months from now, it's not tonight.
Correct.
It doesn't need to be in the IP.
Yeah, I didn't say this before, but sometimes it's nice to know what you're thinking before we write the implementation plan. So even though the plan is vague, it's vague enough to handle whatever you want to do. Just a heads up on what you're thinking on this helps draft the implementation plan.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments? Okay, do you feel you have some information to help you guide you in your next draft?
I do. Thank you.
Okay, next. What's next? Where are we?
Next one's resource portfolio. And
we want all nuclear and coal, is that right? No, am I in the wrong place?
We thought you'd throw in a couple gas turbines too. On this one, this is the one where we're trying to figure out what our option 1, option 2 is going to be. And right now, with our baseline, we bracketed it basically. We have the option 1 is the minimum RPS with 10% less greenhouse gas than PG&E because we think that comports with your JPA agreements requirements. The other one's 100% greenhouse gas free and renewable. And what would be nice to get from you tonight is if you think bracketing reality is sufficient for now, or whether we should look at something else in the middle for nothing else the next round of budget.
Okay, did the advisory committee have some thoughts about this that you'd like to share?
So all of our meetings have gone very, very late after 10 p.m. And a great deal of consideration and thought has been put into this by people who are dedicated and really knowledgeable. Our recommendations are not very clear because, as our sister said earlier, these were very close votes. And so rather than saying we recommend this, I have opted to put forth the things that we took into consideration with our deliberations and show you where that went. There is real concern about removing individuals, so on the 100% thing in particular, right? There is real concern about removing a city's ability to choose to have a 100% default option for its own city. There was a recognition of climate change and a genuine need to get to the highest environmental impact we can possibly have with this entity. And the real ramifications of not getting there. There's also concern about the impact of a loss of competitiveness, as 100% is more expensive. There is concern about the cost of having 2 default systems. Like there's an administrative cost that goes along with that, 2 different sets of marketing materials, 2 different sets of everything, right? You need 2 program administrative fees. There is a real concern about the cost for low-income communities because it's not actually just somebody being uptight over $1. It's like, as nurses, we watch every day people having to make decisions between their medication and their electricity and their food. And right now with homeless rates and displacement rates being what they are inside of our communities, power is a real issue. So this was so close that I would not actually have even said that it went one way or the other. These things need to be taken into consideration. We need to find a way to get to the highest percentage of actual greenhouse gas free as opposed to carbon free renewables in as we possibly can and not lose our customer base. This is another real complicated thing. So we did ultimately decide against, at least initially, having 100% like default option for cities until we work some of this other stuff out. But no one said, like, you should support Walmart because it's cheaper. Like that was just not the heart of any of the arguments. So this is a really big thing. it's written down there as best as we could get it, but this is not an easy decision, and not any one of those factors can be ignored in making this choice.
Thank you. Vinny.
Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to thank the CAC for all those late-night meetings and hard work and getting a lot of this. And I'm sorry if my comments were flippant about people being cheap, but I know a lot of it is that people, they're cheap for a reason, is that they really are, struggling. But my concern still stands. I still want us to be just under, or at least always less than PG&E. I do actually also have a concern about requiring cities to automatically be 100%. I would be happy to bring it to the city of Fremont, and if our council so chooses, to have us as an individual city participate at that higher rate. Obviously, we'd want to know what that's going to cost the city, but I think individual cities could do that, but I don't like the idea of requiring them. And then again, I definitely don't want to see us start with the 100% being required. I would like to see some middle tier, because I think, me being the more radical environmentalist, I would go for the 100%. But I think some middle tier, for the average person who is willing to help out a bit and pay a little more, but not go all the way to 100%, because I was a little alarmed at the difference in cost between those two. So.
Thank you. One of the thoughts, so the decisions we need to make are, do we start out with 2 or 3 tiers of rate choices? And what does the base tier look like? I think we said it's going to be, obviously we need it to be less expensive than PG&E. We already talked about that, whatever the rates are at that point in time. We want it to be in some fashion more environmentally preferable than PG&E's at that point in time, their current mix, whether that's 10% better renewables or 10% better in lower in greenhouse gas emissions, or whatever the metric is. So that the idea was that our base is cheaper and environmentally better, maybe not hugely environmentally better, because we have to keep costs down to start with. And then I think there's also an option for 100% something, 100% renewables or greenhouse gas free or what have you. And then the question is, what it would be a middle tier? First, the question is, what is that base tier going to look like? How much better can it be with keeping the rates down? And can we even know that now? And 2, what would the middle tier look like as an option? Yeah. And so on. Are those the questions? And then the CARE program, I think you're asking for some discussion or about analogous to the CARE program. Is that what you're wanting?
Yeah. Ryan's going to talk about that, but that's on the plate tonight. Yes.
That's on the agenda.
Yes.
Okay. So, Al.
So again, keeping with my theme for the night, let's try to keep it a little bit simple. This would be my suggestion. It's saying that we will have at least 2 tiers, one of which will be a 100% green option, one of which will be greener than PG&E, and leaving that somewhat vague for us to decide later whether that means that it's 10% above or 50% or whatever. And again, saying that we may add an additional tier. But we will have at least 2 tiers, one at 100%, and the other one, the default one, will be greener than PG&E. I think that's enough. I think that gets the IP approved. I think that provides all the flexibility for us to decide, later on the exact tier structure once we have real numbers to put to it and can make an informed decision.
Yeah. A lot of this will turn on what your bids come back on power supply, and just how much green you can afford and still be competitive. And we don't know that yet.
So what, Sean, what did other CCAs do before they flipped the switch in terms of sharing what they thought was going to be their rate structure, and they had to submit a plan?
You mean the product offerings?
Yeah.
Not the rate structure, yeah. Okay. What they've done is essentially indicate what the target would be, simply indicating it as a target, not a promise. But there was a fair bit of specificity about how many products would be offered, and that is, discussion of the product offerings and services of the agency is part of the requirement for the plan. I don't know, Nick, this would be something for you to weigh in on whether or not we need to specify targets, but that has been included in the past.
I think the point about sort of two bookends is really kind of, as I've thought about it, really sort of my belief the way to go. I think there may be merits of a third sort of middle tier, but there may be practical, as you go in, again, as you're going to the market and you're looking at sort of power supply options, that may not be as practical. The cost differentials of, say, 70%, or 75%, or 80%, and 100%, the cost differential may be so small that what's the point, right? Is it, these are not necessarily linear, the cost differentials between, say, PG&E plus 10%, 75, PG&E plus 25% GHG, and then 100%. That's not necessarily a linear cost function. It may be, and so I think, again, I feel that to the degree that we can give ourselves the flexibility to be able to go out and actually assess what the actual costs are going to be, there's a clear aspiration to be as green as possible, while also ensuring that customers are given, rates that are less expensive than PG. That, frankly, is the greatest tension that we're going to face as an agency, is to say we want to do all these great things, but it can't be more expensive. And I think we really are going to have to really sharpen our pencils and look at where market prices are and look at a variety of factors to really assess how do we balance those two factors. And again, I think the way to get there is with a clear statement that here's our options, let's not go, and let's have the aspiration of going as far as we possibly can to deliver the most environmentally preferred products that we can to the customers at competitive rates or at lower cost rates.
So you're basically saying a third option is problematic, or that middle option, or?
I'm not saying it's problematic at all. It may very well be that it makes a tremendous amount of sense to have a third option. And I guess my point is, if you say you have a third option, then you have to have a third option. And if you don't include a third option, you still have the ability to, when assessing what prices are, to say, yeah, you know what, a third option is worth pursuing. And it's more like, I think, direction from the board to the staff to evaluate a third option when we're looking at actually what the rates look like. That, I think, is that's the opportunity to look at what the middle tier would look like, as opposed to putting it in your implementation plan. Okay. So if the direction is we want you to evaluate three options when you're looking at actual rates, that makes a lot of sense. That's something that we could absolutely do. We will go and we'll do that analysis. It'll also have some implications of what the phase-in is. Do you want to have three options for if you have a very small phase-in initially? I mean, there's a lot of variables here that we'll all, evaluate, and we'll come back to the board, giving you the sort of that menu of options to actually then approve what your products are going to be for customers.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if it's easier now just to do that in the implementation plan, just to have the two, then I'm okay with that. But a little difference in what you were saying. You mentioned 70%. I was thinking of, I was discouraged to see only 1% of the people went for the 100% renewable. I was thinking something of, more like if 10% is the baseline, something like 20%. So, you'd get a lot more people that say, okay, I'll pay a little more in my utility bill because I know I'm at least doing something without really, having to pay a lot.
And I think, those are opportunities to do some market research. Those are opportunities to engage with customers who sort of already have stated corporate sustainability goals, or who are members of community groups. Do we work with the Sierra Club chapter representing Alameda County to say, well, this is a great group of people who have a stated interest in the environment. They are, folks you want to market a middle tier product or 100% product to, or companies that have these stated goals. And so that kind of engagement will also, I think, help inform what these sort of opt-up options look like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nick.
Yeah, just that makes a lot of sense to me that we evaluate a third option in light of the reality, the financial realities when we get there. But I do think maybe it does sound like there is consensus that we need at least two, and that consideration of a third would be good as well, because I can see two things. Number one, having more choices makes the program more favorable to consumers. Everyone likes more choices. And then plus, if I could see if we had a scenario where the default was cheaper than PG&E, and then we had a middle tier which was the same as PG&E but a better mix, and then the 100% tier, that could be very interesting to people. So, but just stating it as evaluating the viability of a third option, I think is fine with me.
Okay, so Ann and Olivia.
Just quickly, because Sierra Club was just mentioned, this is not something that we discussed at the CAC meeting, but it still, I think, falls inside the purview. We have a letter in front of us where the Sierra Club did suggest make recommendations on what the two products should be, but added a sentence that says the premium charge from the opt-up product should be allocated towards a fund that is used to develop local clean energy projects, either 50% or 100% of the premium. Again, this is not a topic that we discussed at the CAC meeting, but that is one that we will take up at the CAC meeting. It's a good thing.
Thank you, and that's on their letter that they submitted.
Point of clarification.
Who's asking? Oh, yes,
Hi,
Tim.
Down here.
Tim.
Yeah.
Hello
Hi.
over there.
Hello. That's all right. I'm all settled in here. So just to clarify that, isn't the premium based on the higher cost of procuring that cleaner power? I mean, how could we both pay for the cleaner power and then set that money aside to pay for programs?
My understanding is that it wouldn't be, like, there's profit that is made off of all of the transactions, so I do not believe that they are suggesting that we simply don't pay for the electricity that we are procuring, but rather take the profits from that and dedicate those profits into local build out, so more and more of our electricity is generated inside of our county as opposed to having to procure that in the future, saving us money in the long run. But again, this is not my proposal.
That'd be a surplus revenue, not profits. Go ahead.
So just for the purpose of this conversation, I'd like to echo what Member Mendel has mentioned, just bookending, where we'd like to start and where we'd like to end, and then opening us up to the world of possibilities, just for the IP. And I love hearing all of the different ideas about tiers that could exist in between, in that universe. But for the purpose of this IP, I'd love to get this conversation going and understand what all of our future concerns are going to be. At the same time, give us the flexibility to explore all of those opportunities.
I'm going to echo what my colleague just said next to me here.
I hear an echo.
Yeah. Just one other point that actually the Sierra Club letter raises, and again, we might not be able to determine this at this time, but they recommend default 50%, a default product of 50% renewable, and I don't think they state this here, but apparently other CCAs have chosen 50% renewable mix as part of their default product, and if we're far below that, that might be problematic. But I don't know that I don't know enough about it that I want to specify that at this time.
Mr. Chair, so I agree. From the steering committee, we have always talked about a minimum 50% product. However, we don't have any of the data or analysis in front of us, so maybe our CEO will echo what I'm saying, but we need to leave this IP as general and generic as possible to afford us the ability to really get to our goals.
Thank you. Nick, did you want to say something? No. Okay. PG&E is going to be at around 30% or so when we flip the switch, right, for renewables, roughly? Yeah.
PG&E will be 30% 30% renewables, but I think more significantly, they'll be 65% GHG free.
Right.
So you can go to 50% renewables, but you may actually, because of the trade-offs of costs, you may end up with a lower GHG. You may have 50% renewables and 50% GHG free. And I believe that's actually an example for one of the CCAs that launched at a lower relative GHG. And I think given the focus of what we're trying to achieve here, greenhouse gas emissions should be the target that we're solving for, as opposed to simply solving for renewables.
I agree. I wouldn't even mention what we were going for, because there may be a specific blend that we all agree is best for us after we publish this document.
Yeah, that's a much longer discussion about obviously greenhouse gas emissions reductions are paramount. As well as keeping costs down initially. The question of renewables, several years ago, a big part of the RPS and other policies was to help move the renewables industry, solar industry along, and wind as well, and get them in a place where they needed to be so we could achieve our important environmental goals. And while we've made progress in the past 15 years or so, I don't think we're quite there yet. And so there still is an element of needing to bolster in some fashion the renewables industry. And a lot of people are kind of talking in a frame of mind, places or in its PUC or Sacramento, that isn't what I just said. And I think they're seeing the renewables industry as a little more mature than it actually is. And so we have to balance that out as well. And bolster that, continue to bolster that industry as we focus on greenhouse gases. Okay. Do you have enough guidance on?
I do, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. We're going with the bookends, and to give you maximum flexibility down the road. If you want to put 2 or 3 in the middle, you can do that.
Okay.
And it's going to say something about all being contingent on what power prices are and how much we can afford and not afford.
And well, with reference to, I believe, our factors, including environmental benefits, environmental emission reductions, and renewables, and so on. I mean, those are all factors we'll take into account.
Yes.
Okay. Al?
So I'm sorry, we didn't really talk about whether a city can be allowed to set the default for all of their residents at 100%, at the higher renewable option. And do you need feedback on that, or can we leave that for later?
I think we can leave that for later, and my own personal opinion is all about customer choice. And if the customer doesn't get to make the choice, it seems like you're sort of defeating the purpose of customer choice.
Yeah. So that's fine, and we'll figure this out later then. Thank you.
Okay.
Are we talking about the CARE program? Is that coming up later?
As soon as we get done with this, Brian's on. He's going to talk about CARE. Is it universally agreed we have preference for local renewables? That's sort of a rhetorical question, I think, but okay. And then the final one was the use of unbundled RECs. The law allows you to use a certain amount of unbundled RECs to meet your RPS requirements. We don't see that being done with the other CCAs. They want to meet their renewables by actually doing renewables as opposed to buying RECs. Is the board looked at that or have a view on that by chance?
I believe our JPA document puts a cap on that. That is a lower cap than state law, and so you certainly could repeat that language since it exists already, and even last resort-ish type of language too. I think there's general consensus that we don't want to do that. That doesn't mean we will never ever do that in a pinch, but I'm just speaking off the top. And I believe we had a speaker who came in a little late but wanted to speak on this item, Victor Uno, on this broad item that we're talking about now. Jessica, you already talked, so I'm going to allow you to talk again, a general public comment later. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies. I misunderstood the process. I thought actually that people could actually speak on each one of these numbers that were coming up as opposed to the broad overview. Very brief, thank you for your comments about the implementation plan. And I think with the new CEO here, understanding the vision of this board and also the community members, CAC members, that the marching orders contained in the plan will be very clear, and the sentiment expressed with this new agency. The reason why I'm speaking is the community board or committee is a new effort to try to involve a broader voice in this process, and I would say it's a great effort. I would say that the community participation needs to be more robust. We need ourselves to do more outreach so that we actually get more broader participation. And in that regard, I think that what might help is if the recommendations actually reflect what the vote was in the committee, because that might better reflect, as you do in your city meetings, the vote was 5-4, unanimous. And that way it would give a sense, because some of these issues are very, the tension between, say, renewables, greenhouse gas, our efforts, say, in the IBW, I mean, we built a facility that's greenhouse gas free, and there was tension in the IBW because we represent workers that do gas. But I would say that the environmental concerns that we have as environmentalists and the tremendous impacts of climate change on communities of color and poor communities are huge. And so our commitment to elevating, raising the level of greenhouse gas, limiting that as much as possible. And actually, if there are communities that have the financial wherewithal to do that, well, good for them. We would not say that Portola Valley is a great example. I mean, their median income is $250,000. There are 4,000 members in that community, and it's 92% non-diverse. And it doesn't reflect what Alameda County is. And so we understand that our members who live here, there's issues of income, challenges. So all these things, we're trying to balance, I think, this issue of 100% renewables. I personally would say if there's a community Piedmont or something that wants to do something, that option might be made available to them. But if there are communities, and I would note too that the price of greenhouse gas-free generation is being lowered, especially with hydro right now. So I just want to say that the committee is doing some great work, just some suggestions for how to reflect that conversation in the actual vote numbers, because some were very unanimous and others, like in any community, would be a little bit challenged and diverse. So again, that's my comment, and we would completely align ourselves with the broad spectrum of choice there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. So where are we now?
The next one is on what types of programs you're thinking about offering. And
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I think
yes.
our representative from the CAC would like to.
Oh.
Just as clarification, the community had come together and recommended that all Bucket 3 unbundled recs were absolutely not going to be part of our program. The board decided that there would be 50% of the allowable limit, which right now I think puts it at around 1.5%, which is expected to decrease over time to go away. But that is the parameters that you're looking at, with the community strongly united behind not having unbundled recs whatsoever. And as was said in the meeting last night, there will be a process to make sure that the votes are reflected, Victor. The reason that we have notes today is because I wrote them. And so I didn't have the vote count to include. So.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Okay, next.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
The final one is programs, and these are different types of programs for the CCA participants. And Ryan Ramos is going to go through these and talk about them just real briefly, and then see what you'd like to do.
Good evening. So I wanted to address your comment first, Vice Chair, regarding care. So as you see on this slide, the list of typically electric utility offerings for programs is on here. CARE is not included on this just because it is required by CPUC to be included as CCA, so that is not even a question that will be an offering for EBCE. The other types of programs, the other types of energy programs that the CCA can provide are net energy metering, feed-in tariffs. If you need me to explain what some of these programs are, please let me know. Demand response, electric vehicles, DER incentives, which is distributed energy resource incentives, energy storage, efficiency, and community solar. For the purposes of the implementation plan, we recommend basically just listing the types of programs we're considering offering, not actually specifying which ones we're going to offer and when we're going to offer it. For practical matter, what we do recommend offering at the startup is net energy metering, feed-in tariffs, obviously the low-income assistance care program, and community solar. As we've received a lot of input that community solar is a good local job development creator, and so we want to have that at start off. But for the purposes of the implementation plan, we feel that leaving it relatively broad and listing them out, maybe even stating including these, but can include others as we go through the process. And we're going to be getting a lot of feedback from the local development business plan on other possible programs. And so I think, as I stated, the implementation plan, we want to just keep it pretty straightforward and simple.
Thank you. Comments? Nick?
I'm happy to not be more specific than this. Just one note on future direction. You did not mention electric vehicle incentives as one of maybe the first programs that might come out, but I think that's very important for greenhouse gas reduction. That be one of the more important programs that we consider when it comes time to consider that in the future.
Thank you.
We did have a recommendation specifically to include a discussion of a range of possible programs that EBCE will implement over time, as is consistent with the recommendation of the local development business plan.
Okay, thank you. So I think what you're hearing is in this implementation plan, making reference to these, pointing out we're going to be doing some of these sooner rather than later, others will follow. But ultimately, beyond this submission of this plan, we as a board are going to have to decide what our timeline is for rolling out these other programs for our customers and for the benefits they provide to all of us. And we'll be looking to our CEO and our staff and the CAC to make those suggestions and recommendations leading up to when we're flipping the switch. Because yes, there may be a few of these, but we want to have them ready on day 1 or day 10, and then others a year later, 2 years later. So, okay. Any other comments or questions on this item? Seeing none. What's next? Is that it?
That's pretty much a wrap on the implementation plan. We should talk maybe about going forward and how staff wants to do that. The next board meeting is what, is it August the 2nd? Yeah, okay. At that time, we would like to have you an implementation plan in draft for you to take a look at and hopefully approve so we can get that filed before the summer holiday. And along with that, we might want to, I was thinking we might tune up the budget a little bit based on some input tonight and give you another rendition of that with a view towards each time we do it, it gets a little tighter, because there's been some good feedback tonight on some of these issues which would allow us to refine the budget and try to get it, let's say, more accurate. So does that seem like a reasonable agenda, at least from our standpoint, for the next meeting?
So tell me again what you believe you'll have available for us leading up to the 2nd.
As a follow-up to this meeting, I think we can have an updated budget, 3-year budget like we presented tonight that's a little tighter as far as accuracy goes, and the draft implementation plan for you to look at and go through and hopefully approve so we can get that filed.
And so that draft plan would be available the Friday before? That's very, very soon.
We'll get it done as quick as we can.
Okay. So that way we would all enjoy that reading over the weekend, because that's what we like to read over the weekend, and then come prepared on August, was that 3rd, you said? Yeah, 2nd. I'm sorry, yes, Wednesday evening. Staff, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So it's only about 2 weeks between now to August 2nd, and so we have a tremendous amount of work to get done in that time. I think we can do it, but the way the implementation plan is written, there could be some controversy over it. There could be some desire to take a closer look at it. So in case we can't get this buttoned down on August 2nd, staff is wondering when the next possible meeting of this board could be. We're curious. We don't think one during the middle of August will work, because we understand that several of the bodies that you represent individually go dark during August. But the next opportunity would be September 6th. That would be 2 days following Labor Day. So staff is just trying to get an idea of whether or not this board would be willing to meet that soon after Labor Day on September 6th.
Who here is going to be on a different planet on 2 days after Labor Day?
That's not a good idea.
Don?
Well, and Dan, I want to point out that the next scheduled meeting's a day or two before or after our executive director, CEO, comes on board. So we might want to consider also in that what we should do and what we shouldn't do. What we could better wait until the CEO's on board. That's part of the consideration. So maybe that's another reason to change around the meetings a little bit.
What I would suggest is let's continue down the path of trying to have it ready, and then perhaps we can evaluate sort of under sort of Brown Act. I'm not so familiar with how it works for this kind of entity, but for the commission I work for, you can continue an item. You can continue a meeting for a specific item. So you could continue the meeting to discuss just the implementation plan to some future date. You can delegate to some subset of people to work on providing additional feedback. So what I would say is perhaps let's just focus on trying to get it done, and then on the 2nd we can, if it looks likely that it's not going to be approved, then at that point we can discuss scheduling a follow-on, whether it's a one-off meeting just to specifically finish up the implementation plan, or no, let's wait an additional month or longer to deal with it, because obviously there's so many issues. I think so that would be my recommendation there.
Okay, so we're looking at the 3rd of August, 2nd of August, and then again at the 6th of September.
Or sooner, possibly, pending what the CEO would like to do, possibly calling a special meeting.
It's more what the board would like to do, right? I think you'll know once you've evaluated the draft plan how close you are. It may be that there's one item, or there may be a tremendous number of items, and I think it will be up to the board to make a determination of, how you want to proceed and what the timing should be. I think with regards to what's up here, I think we're not going to touch upon these additional items. It really is just going to be focused on the implementation plan at the next meeting. That's a pretty meaty document that I think.
Vice Chair, could I suggest that it's not out of the question to, hold the meeting in August if the board decides we want to do that? We could either do a poll now, or staff could poll us as to whether or not we actually could meet in August. I'd hate to just have that be an artificial barrier to getting the work done in a timely manner.
I thought we did a poll, and that's how we came up with a date in August already. Wasn't there a poll that went out?
Mr. Chair, at the last meeting, when Supervisor Haggerty was present, he actually did a quick poll around to see whether they felt that August 2nd or August 16th would be a preferable meeting time, and August 2nd was a pretty solid favorite. So, and that's why we're doing August 2nd.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to be, our next meeting will be August 2nd, 6 o'clock in this room. And for now, there is no meeting scheduled for the third Wednesday in August. That could always change with a special meeting or something, but for now that's not going to happen. And then there'll be another meeting, regularly scheduled meeting, September 6th, the Wednesday after Labor Day, 6 o'clock in this lovely room. Okay. Anything else from our consultant?
No.
No. I question, all the other, I assume this is to Sean or anybody, all the other CCAs that are farther along than us, who have already submitted their plans, those are on somebody's website, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so
they're on the CPUC website if they've been adopted also and approved.
If somebody could, Bruce, if you could send a link to the entire board, hey, here are some other plans from other CCAs that have been submitted, that could give us some sense as to what we should be looking for. It may also give us some sense as to what we shouldn't do or should not write, but at least we'll be able to have some comparison. So, because we don't have enough to read already, each of us, so we want to read more things, and this will be our opportunity to do that. Okay. Yes, yeah. And Olivia.
Just as a point, our committee really reads all of this stuff in advance and goes through and runs every analysis you can possibly do, and they each sit down with their group of expertise and all of their friends. This is how we spend our weekend. If there is any way that even if a document is not yet complete, like the whole report isn't ready, but you have this component and you can send it to us so we can get that process started, then when we get the last thing, whenever we get it, what we did here, which actually has quite a lot of very substantial specific language involved in it, it was about 24 hours after we got the budget, and then this report for this board was put together in 15 hours, including transportation and sleeping. So anything that you can get to us ahead of time, we also recognize the huge amount of work that staff is doing and are so very grateful for how fast that was. But anything you can get to us is super helpful.
We got the request to get things out sooner from about everybody in the room. So we've heard that.
Yeah.
We will do the best we can.
We just have to meet before this board.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, I think we're done with this agenda item. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
It's been very good.
Okay. So next is board member staff announcements. I'm going to reopen public comment since we had one more person who wanted a public comment. Jessica, did you have another 2 or 3 minutes of public comment on something?
Well, I was going to comment on what you all were talking about.
That's fine. Come on up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, computer with me because I'm still working. So one thing I just wanted to emphasize, I was hearing a lot, and I think somebody corrected that along the way, is saying that your program is going to be like PG&E. To really, really emphasize using the program's name, East Bay Community Energy, really emphasizing that there is choice, that you're giving choice to ratepayers in the different communities that make up this program. I also wanted to just emphasize as an environmental justice and climate justice organizer is that, a lot of what we're fighting for is equity and not being lost in the shuffle. There's dirty energy and all the bad that comes with that. And then there's carbon fundamentalism, which is like race, we got to do this because the climate is changing. But there's all these communities here in the middle who could very easily be left in the dark, literally. And so a lot of what we're trying to emphasize is that we're not leaving these communities out of the equation, and really uplifting their voices. And I just want to emphasize that when I speak, although I am speaking oftentimes from my personal experience as an environmental justice person, ratepayer, etc., I'm also speaking on behalf of about 60 community organizations that are working on environmental justice and climate change, and a lot of them, if they were here tonight, would be emphasizing that 100% default is a community choice killer. It would leave a lot of their community members behind. Yes, we are doing work to curb climate change. Yes, we are trying to uplift these voices, but we cannot be extreme and leaving them behind. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I've shared with all of the board members the different organizations that have signed on, and I just wanted to just reiterate that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very important. Okay. Now we are at board member and staff announcements. Does staff have any announcements? Bruce, can I ask that you send out a date reminder to the entire board as soon as possible for the next 2 dates, just so it's a reminder to get it on their calendar, August 2nd and September 6th, to the entire board, and just so people have no excuse to forget the date?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Any staff announcements? Anybody over there? Any board announcements?
We're good.
Okay, all right. We are hereby adjourned. Oh, wait. There we go. Yay.